For 5 minutes, on a clear November morning, a city simply ceased to exist. It was All Saints' Day, 1755. Lisbon, one of Europe's wealthiest and most devout cities, was at prayer. Churches were packed, candles flickered, and the air was thick with incense and devotion. Then, without warning, the very ground beneath their feet began to betray them. This wasn't just a tremor, it was a cataclysm. A seismic event so profound it would rewrite maps, challenge philosophical thought, and ultimately shape the very trajectory of the Age of Enlightenment. Its ripples reached far beyond Portugal's shattered shores, touching every corner of the intellectual world. Lisbon, then the capital of a vast maritime empire, was a jewel. Its harbor teemed with ships laden with gold from Brazil, spices from the East, and silks from China. Its streets bustled with merchants, diplomats, and artists. It was a city confident in its prosperity and its place in God's favor. The earthquake struck at approximately 9:40 a.m. The initial shock lasted between 3 and 6 minutes. Imagine the terror: stone buildings, magnificent cathedrals, and humble homes all beginning to sway, then crumble, then collapse, trapping thousands within their walls. Those who survived the initial collapse stumbled out into a city turning to rubble. But the earth wasn't finished. 2 more massive tremors followed, ensuring that almost every structure still standing was brought down. And then, the true horror began to unfold. Fires ignited by hundreds of thousands of candles in the churches, cooking fires in homes, and broken oil lamps swept through the city. Survivors, trapped amongst the debris, found themselves surrounded by an inferno. The smoke blackened the sky, turning day into a terrifying twilight. But Lisbon sits on the Tagus River estuary, directly on the Atlantic coast. And the earthquake, with its epicenter in the Atlantic Ocean, had a third, utterly devastating surprise in store: a tsunami. A monstrous wave, perhaps 20 feet high, surged inland, wiping away the fleeing survivors. Many who had sought refuge on the riverbanks, believing they were safe from the fires, were simply swept out to sea. Ships in the harbor were dashed against the shore or capsized. The water then receded, only to return with another, equally destructive wave. The death toll is impossible to ascertain precisely, but estimates range from 30,000 to 100,000 people. Lisbon was reduced to ashes and rubble. 85% of its buildings were destroyed. It was a catastrophe on an unimaginable scale, even for an era accustomed to hardship. News of the disaster spread slowly but surely across Europe, carried by merchant ships and frantic dispatches. It arrived at a particularly sensitive moment for Western thought, a time when reason, optimism, and the concept of a benevolent God was central to intellectual discourse. This was the Age of Enlightenment, a period defined by figures like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Kant. Their philosophies championed human reason, natural law, and the belief that humanity was progressing towards a more perfect society. Lisbon presented a direct challenge to these ideals. How could such a devastating, seemingly arbitrary act of God occur in a world governed by a benevolent creator? Why did it strike a devout Catholic city, sparing less pious ones? These were the questions that haunted the intellectual salons of Paris, London, and Berlin. Voltaire, perhaps the most prominent voice of the Enlightenment, was deeply shaken. His initial optimism, articulated in works like Candide, was directly impacted. He saw the earthquake not as divine punishment, but as a cruel, senseless act of nature, shattering the notion of the best of all possible worlds. His poem on the Lisbon disaster, published in 1756, directly challenged the philosophical optimism of Leibniz and Pope. It argued against the idea that every event, no matter how tragic, ultimately serves a greater good. For Voltaire, Lisbon was pure, unadulterated suffering. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, another giant of the Enlightenment, responded differently. While sympathetic to the suffering, he argued that humanity's own choices, not God's will, exacerbated the disaster. If people hadn't built so many tall, densely packed buildings, fewer would have died. Rousseau's argument shifted the blame from divine wrath to human vulnerability and urban planning. It was an early, profound moment in the discussion of disaster preparedness and the social contract, a concept he would later explore in his most famous works. Even Immanuel Kant, far away in Königsberg, was fascinated. He published 3 different texts on the Lisbon earthquake, attempting to explain it scientifically without resorting to divine intervention. He was among the first to hypothesize that earthquakes were caused by shifts in the Earth's crust. This was revolutionary. At a time when many still attributed such events to God's anger, Kant, a philosopher, was looking for a natural, mechanistic explanation. His scientific curiosity was a testament to the Enlightenment's core belief in human reason's power to understand the world. The practical response in Lisbon itself was equally remarkable, spearheaded by Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, the Marquis of Pombal, then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. His famous directive, "Bury the dead and feed the living." Pombal acted with astonishing speed and ruthlessness. He imposed martial law, prevented looting with public executions, and organized massive relief efforts. He even ordered the bodies of the dead to be loaded onto barges and sunk at sea to prevent disease outbreaks. But Pombal's most enduring legacy was the rebuilding of Lisbon. He famously commissioned architects to design earthquake-resistant buildings, laying out a grid pattern of wide, straight streets, a stark contrast to the medieval labyrinth that existed before. His engineers even conducted early experiments in earthquake engineering, marching troops around models of buildings to simulate seismic activity. This was arguably the birth of modern urban planning and seismic engineering, born directly from the ashes of Lisbon. The Great Lisbon Earthquake of 1755 wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a crucible. It forced philosophers to reevaluate their understanding of God, nature, and humanity's place in the world. It pushed science to seek rational explanations for seemingly irrational events. And it galvanized a practical, empirical approach to governance and urban design that would influence cities for centuries. In its wake, a new, more resilient Lisbon emerged, and with it, a slightly more pragmatic, less idealized age of enlightenment. What other hidden historical events reshaped our understanding of the world?